Good day, everyone. It's good evening where I am. It's good morning where my colleague who's with me, whom I will introduce in a second, is. I'll let her tell you where she is in a bit. But I am so glad for you to be joining us for another in our series of conversations, as we using this as one way to celebrate our 30 years in business. Um, uh, the purpose of these is simply that: is for me to have the chance to chat with some really, really smart people and basically turn the mic over to them. So over the last dozen years or so, I've done well over 600 interviews, conversations where I've been the one with the mic. And I've done many podcast interviews where I've been the one being interviewed, if you will. But this is a series we're doing sort of on our platforms, where I'm handing the mic off, which I will do here in just a few minutes. So all of it meant to be a way for us to give back to all of you who are friends, colleagues, or maybe future partners and friends as well, to share some of the stuff that we've learned over the last 30 years. So that's why we're here. But why are you here? Hopefully to gain value from it, but also to hopefully engage. I've been saying this in all of these, that the best thing for you to do is to say hello. So whatever platform you're on, to go in and say hello, tell us where you're located. I do that for a couple of reasons. One is it's kind of nice to know where people are. Sometimes I know the people who are saying hello. And mostly, though, the reason that I'm doing it is to get you used to engaging. If I can encourage you and you get used to typing now, you might type as we're going, which is what I really want, which is if you have questions, comments, thoughts, you will share them. I say it on my live podcast interviews, which I had one earlier today, like, I don't know, 10 hours ago, where I said, if you were in a conversation with us around the table and you had a question, you would ask it. If you had a comment, you would share it. If you had an idea, you would offer it. And so I say the same thing here. You got a comment, a question, an idea, offer it, share it, and please go into the comments wherever you are and say hello. That's sort of why we're here. And I'm going to introduce Emma Weber here. And so before I introduce her officially, let me tell you why I've asked her to join me. Throughout this series, I've asked people that I value and that I enjoy spending time with. Emma said to me before we started, she goes, it doesn't really matter if anyone else hears this. I'm just looking forward to this conversation. And I feel exactly the same way. So let me introduce Emma, and then I will turn the mic over to her. I'm going to move my notes over in front of her face, so it doesn't look like I'm looking off to the side. Emma Weber is a learning transfer authority. She made it her mission in life to make a difference to learning transfer worldwide. Frustrated by the amount of learning which is wasted when it fails to make it across the knowing-doing gap, Emma created the Turning Learning into Action methodology to solve that problem. This methodology is deployed in 20 countries and in 12 languages by a talented team and by Coach M, a conversational intelligence chatbot. Coach M is challenging industry thinking of what's possible in learning transfer. Emma shares her passion and expertise through her writing. Her first book, Turning Learning into Action, a proven methodology for effective transfer of learning, was published by Coogan Page in 2014. And her newest book was co-written by her for ATD Press, and it is titled Designing Virtual Learning for Application and Impact. And she might tell a story about how we're connected related to her first book. And with that, Emma, thanks for being here, all the way from Australia, and the microphone is yours.
Kevin, thank you. I am so delighted to be here on a morning for me, afternoon, evening for you. So thanks to everyone listening in and joining us at the somewhat different time of day than you might be having your regular conversations. But I'm thrilled to be here and really looking forward to this conversation, Kevin. And I think we should kick off with kind of how we met and how we first connected. And as part of that, I can share why I'm so excited to be here. Have to say,
I remember it well.
You remember it well. Now, I was trying to calculate earlier. I think it's possibly 12 years ago. Could that be right? Could it even be longer?
Well, if your book came out in 14, we know it's before that. So
we do. And actually, that was a 4-year project. So I'm going to go 2010. 2010 was when we met. And Kevin, you are one of the most generous people I know. Generous, enthusiastic, and committed to what you do. I say that hand on heart. And when we met, 2010, Kevin, I didn't know anyone in learning. I didn't know anyone at ATD. You were at the expo stand. We got chatting, and within half an hour, you had introduced me to a potential publisher, which we did then go on to sign a contract with. And that just speaks to your generosity, Kevin. So, thank you from the bottom of my heart for being that person that stepped forward, understood my message I was trying to get across, and really sort of you're a champion of other people. That's what I see.
Well, I do remember that, and I remember your passion for this really important work that I just described to people in your intro, and I've had the good fortune of helping several people get a book launched, and really only making an introduction. Like, I didn't do any work; you did all the work. But it's always a pleasure to see you, and this time to see you not just in person once every year or two, but for this event. So thank you so much for doing this with us and with me. And I guess you're in charge, so lead us onward.
Lead us onwards. So one of the things, Kevin, I see is that you are, really good at taking action. And I remember that day when we connected, we left the booth, we walked over to the publisher. Yeah.
We did.
So I know that taking action is really important to you. But what I really also observe is your commitment to helping leaders and people engage and get connected in organizations is just so at the core of what you do.
Well, I mean, listen, our connection is around learning, right? And so, and that idea of moving from the knowing to doing gap, is so critical, because oftentimes people will say, well, I already know that. I'm like, well, I don't care if you know it. Are you doing it? Because it doesn't really matter what we have up here. It's only what we have here, right? And here, and in our action. So, I have long believed that in order for leaders to be more effective, they have to do stuff. They have to try stuff. They have to take action. They have to move forward. And anyone who's going to lead, whether it's positionally or not, there has to be movement, right? And so I'm glad that you see that, because I hope that I'm modeling that for others.
Yeah. And so what is it, Kevin, that propels you into taking action? What is it that gets you moving forward?
Well, I have high expectations of myself. I think that's probably been true my entire life. Maybe at times almost to a fault, I suppose. But ultimately, I think, as it relates to our conversation today, I'm eternally blessed to know that I'm doing the work I was put on the planet to do. And so when we have a connection of what we're trying to accomplish to a purpose, then that makes all the difference, right? It's easy to be engaged when we see a connection between that work that we're doing and something that has meaning to us. So, for example, I had the chance this past weekend to be the officiant for my niece's wedding. Now, I am not an officiant by trade. I think everybody knows that. I have done this now twice, both of them for nieces, both of them named Allie. I don't know. I don't have any other nieces named Allie, so I'm probably done with this particular portion of my life. But to have the chance to do that, and to have it means something. Obviously, it means something to my niece, and in this case, her now husband, Kevin. But also, the purpose that comes with the responsibility of doing that, drives you to take action. And so whether it's that, or whether in my case of my life purpose, or for any of us in our work, when we as leaders can help people find meaning and purpose in their work, it's far easier for people to get energized.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you're looking today out at your organizations, whether, whatever size of organizations that is, how close do you feel people are aligning with their purpose?
Well, I think I'll answer it this way. I mean,
Mm.
I would like to hope that the people on our team would feel like that they see alignment to that. I'm sure that some members of our team there's room that we could go that they could go and that I could help them go. But I will say it this way: that the closer people have alignment and meaning, the more successful the team will be. The closer. So there's two kinds of alignment I'll say here. One is alignment to goals. Do people know that what they're doing has an impact on the organizational goals? And if that
Mhm.
alignment is there, that will help in and of itself. But if that goal, that organizational goal, is connected to the values of the folks doing the work, then that's the next piece. And
Yeah.
there's someone who I've known for a long time, remembering a younger Kevin. Yes. Well, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate that. You know what that means, Sherry? I don't know about you, but this means I'm old. That's what that means. Um, Actually, I met Sherry. I think I had just started my business 3-4 years, maybe not even quite that long. For sure. So yeah, I think that, uh, it's one thing to ask that about me, which I appreciate you asking,
Mm.
but in terms of us creating energy and engagement with our teams, it's really helping people find that connection, because at the end of the day, Emma, there's a big mistake that I think people like us, like me, have made over the years, and it started with the great work of Gallup around employee engagement, which is great work. I mean, it's great work. But what it's led to is everyone thinking, what do we as leaders have to do to make people engaged? Which is exactly wrong, because I can't make you be engaged. Right? Now, there are things I can do as a leader to make it harder for you to choose to be engaged, but engagement is a choice that every individual makes. Right? And so there are things that we as leaders can do that might make it easier for people to make that choice. But ultimately, the things that we should do are not activities or anything other than creating an environment that helps people make that choice. Because ultimately, it doesn't belong to us; it belongs to them.
It's interesting, Kevin, because that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you as to whose role is it to create a space where people can engage?
Well,
Does it come down to the individual? Is it the leader? And it sounds there as if the leader can influence,
we can
but at
certainly influence, and
yeah,
one of the things we can do. One of the best ways we can influence is like the best way we can influence anything, which is by our example, right? But providing a new thing or putting in ping pong tables or
yeah,
whatever, like that's not it. And so much of what's happened has been that, right? And people and a lot of leaders have said, well, how do I engage my folks when they're not in the office? Well, guess what? They might be more engaged. Now,
mm,
there's still things we need to do, again, that help create that environment. We have to help people see that purpose. We have to continue to help people see a connection between the work they're doing and the good work that can be done uh, as an outcome of that work, right? We have to help people find that meaning, but mostly what we need to do is that and be engaged ourselves, and then reinforce that engagement, encourage that engagement. That's what we need to do. Yes.
yeah.
Damon says, yeah, a pizza party's not going to do it, Damon. And you know it. That's why you're saying it, right? That doesn't mean we shouldn't have pizza. But to think that that's somehow going to magically change our engagement scores,
Yeah,
it's just not going to. And
yeah.
in fact, if that's why we think we're doing it, it probably actually has the opposite effect.
So let's think of some of those things that do make it easier for people to engage. What practically, Kevin, would you share with leaders that are those types of things that make it easier for people to engage and acknowledge their engagement?
Well, again, I think the very first thing is to be engaged ourselves, right? The very first thing is that, I've always say that the best way to influence, most powerful way to influence is with our action. The example that I used to use is if I wanted my children to grow up to be readers, the best thing for me to do is for them to see me reading a book, right? And so that follows through for everything. If we want our teams to be more positive and less negative in the workplace, then by gum, we better be more positive. If we want our teams to be engaged, and there are great benefits to us as organizations when they are, then we need to be engaged first. And so that's the first and most important thing is to literally lead by example. I think beyond that, the next thing is probably helping people understand what engagement is, which is that personal choice. Emma, I think that there are lots of people that, well, I'll put it this way: like everybody would ultimately like to be engaged in their work.
Yeah, I
Like, why
firmly.
wouldn't they? There's so many good things that happen as a result, right? It's good for your career, ultimately. It's good for your mental and spiritual health, for sure. It's good for your relationships. It does all sorts of great things. It helps with your productivity. Like, it does all sorts of great things for you. It also helps the organization. But the thing is that while I think everyone would kind of like that in a perfect world, many people don't really believe that's possible at work. I mean, they grew up in a household, perhaps, where, mom and dad, or mom or dad, talked about, I can't wait till Friday, where people talked about their horrible boss. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we have 2 movies titled that were popular. Like, people don't have a problem understanding why work could be bad, that work could be awful rather than awesome. And many people, I think, don't realize that it's even possible. And if they don't see it as possible, if they don't get that mindset shifted, then it doesn't matter, right? So I think that one of the things that we can do is we can help them see that that's a possibility, and that it isn't just something that benefits the company. Like, let's be clear. When people are engaged, the company benefits, but so does the individual.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we can help people see that this isn't something we're doing to them for one-sided benefit. This is a everybody wins scenario. Organization wins, individual wins, leader wins. Like, I'd rather lead a team of engaged folks, right? So, like, it's truly a win-win-win scenario. But if people don't see it as possible, and they don't see it as being in their best interest, then we can't get them to that choice.
Yeah. And just if someone's listening as a leader today, and they're kind of reflecting on this, I'm a big reflector, as you know.
Yes, me too.
And they're kind of thinking to themselves, okay, am I engaged? What would you be saying to someone if they're asking themselves, okay, am I sincerely engaged?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask that,
Okay.
because I've already said how connected I am to my work and my purpose, and how connected they are. And so it's obvious to me. But I think the answer is that if you have to ask, you're not as engaged as you could be. Like, I think the answer is, if you are, you know it. But sometimes people ask the wrong question. They say, well, am I satisfied? Well, job satisfaction is fine, but that's a low bar. That is not engagement. Right? Well, I kind of like my work. I kind of like my paycheck. It's fine. Well, if you have ever been in a committed relationship and your significant other says things are fine, they're not. Right? And so I think, Emma, my answer to your question is that if you have to ask, or if you're asking and you're not sure, I mean, you may be on the way, or you might be somewhat engaged, but you haven't hit that pinnacle yet.
Yeah.
I think that if you're really there, you know it because you feel it.
Yeah. And so this is interesting, because one of the things we're saying here is leading by example is the first, the key, one of the key things we're talking about here. And for me, that creates the energy, it creates the environment, and instinctively people will know.
Yeah? Well, and the other thing, then it's not like, because so much of this is, and when I said that we've done a disservice as, consultant author
Mm,
people have done a disservice is that many have taken the great work of Gallup and said, now what can we do to bump our number?
mm.
And then it means it feels like it's something we're doing to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And which we all will sort of naturally, resist or wonder about or think, well, why are they doing that? And is this just for the company? Like, so all of that gets in the way. But when people see us as being engaged and wanting to be engaged and working to find connection and meaning in our work, and finding meaning with those that we work with, that when that is happening for us, we titled this, or basically you titled this, Staying Engaged and Energized. When we're engaged, we'll be energized, right?
Yeah.
They go together.
And so here's the interesting thing. I think because I would applaud people for being courageous enough to actually check in and say, actually, am I engaged? Yeah. Because
Sure.
actually, if we don't ask the question, we could be missing something. And I think one of the challenges is we are so busy. Many people are kind of fall into this busyness trap of, meetings, goals, objectives, KPIs, that we can then assume that we're engaged because we're engaged in activity as opposed to truly having our heart engaged.
Well, I have said many times that busy is the most dangerous four-letter word in the English language. My grandmother would have disagreed, but I don't think there's any question about that. And it goes back to your earlier point about being a big fan of reflection, right? Like, of course we should ask ourselves that question. How engaged am I? Am I as engaged as I could be, as I want to be? Because it's not like I am or I'm not, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of degree. And so I think it's a great question to ask. And I think that the best leaders are leaders who don't succumb to busy, and that make time for thinking, which includes introspection / reflection, right? And we can model that for our teams too, right? Like, it's almost profoundly true that we can't lead effectively if we're always focused on the activity. It has to be about accomplishment. And if it's about accomplishment, then that forces us to be clear about what we're accomplishing. Are we accomplishing the right things for the right reasons in the right ways? And that forces us back to reflection. One of my mentors, coaches, calls it Renaissance time. And
nice.
I think it's a great, I almost said it earlier, like, well, I need to preface it. So, but I think about that time in thought, time in study, time in reflection is important. And I love that you brought that up, because that might not be a message that people would expect to hear in a session talking about engagement and energy.
Yeah. And it's people take that time to reflect. And I love that phrase, Renaissance time. You're building that relationship with yourself that then gives you the opportunity to build that relationship with others. Because often if we're thinking about, engaging with other people, wanting to help other people engage, we kind of focus on them. And I do see sometimes that leaders need to really think about putting themselves first, to be engaged for themselves, to then allow other people to come in with that engagement.
This is an interesting point, because so two things. One is people will sometimes say to me, well, so how do you feel about servant leadership, Kevin? And I always say, well, there's an extra word. I said, because I don't think you can lead without leading from a place of service. Your leaders are in service of the desired outcomes and of the people that are making those desired outcomes happen. So there's the first half of that. And so, because so often when we say, well, if I'm going to be a servant leader, then I have to put my team first, I have to put the outcomes ahead of myself. And that's true, except that if you aren't at your best, you can't be your best for them. I can't serve my team at my best if I'm not at my best. And
Mm.
so, it's kind of the old Oprah thing, right? Like, you can't take care of others unless you're taking care of yourself, kind of thing. And I think that's exactly right. That was a big message, Emma, that we shared a lot during the pandemic as we worked with leaders and as we helped leaders and organizations think about mental health and all those sorts of things. Mental fitness, we like to think about it as, because we're not qualified to talk about mental health, but we can talk about mental fitness. And that was a key message. Like, you've got to take care of yourself. If you're not doing that, and that includes this kind of stuff that we're talking about, how can I have high energy for my team if I'm not taking care of myself? It's not possible.
Yeah.
It's not possible, right?
And so let's think about how that being energized then.
Sherry's talking about the oxygen mask thing, right? Like, we have to. We have to. I really wish I had been the first person to think of that metaphor, because it's a really good one. I always hate to say it because it gets said so often, but it's so very true. Thanks for saying that, Sherry.
Yeah, indeed. So when we're thinking about getting, showing people that they have this choice and the leading by example, and you mentioned it earlier, Kevin, we have got so many hybrid workplaces now. Do you feel that it's harder to lead by example when people are hybrid working? What can we do to overcome that? I'd love your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that I get asked that question a lot. And I would say that people are still watching. People still know. They aren't, because we aren't just, people aren't just following our example by their eyes, right? But by our time and by so many other ways, right? So, like, yes, we aren't maybe seen as often, right? And that's fair, but we're being watched by all of people's senses all of the time. So I do think that when we're leading a team at distance, whether that's some of the people or all of the people or some of the people some of the time, that we do have to be more intentional, right, about some things. Like, people used to always talk about having an open door policy, which is, I could argue that we sometimes need a closed door policy, because we need time to do the stuff you and I are talking about. But if I have an open door policy, and I generally agree with that premise, if people aren't in the office, they can't even see the door, right? So we have to do different things to make sure that people are available, whether you call that office hours, whether you make yourself available in other sorts of ways, or people know when they can reach you at any given time, all of those things, whether people know how to understand what's on your calendar so they know when you're available and when you're not, all those kinds of things. So there's an example, right? Another example is that if you really want your team to have strong relationships, do they see you investing in relationships with them? Because if they don't, then those are hollow words, right? So Joyce, you made this comment that said so many disregard this very important aspect, and I don't know, Joyce, what aspect it was. So tell us what you meant there, if you're still following along. So I think that, like, I'll put it this way: people will often say the best leaders lead by example, to which I say every leader leads by example, because they're watching. The only question is the example that we're leaving the one we want them to replicate, right? They're watching, they're paying attention, they're noticing what we're saying, what we're not saying, when we're saying it, how we're saying it. If we say that, for example, relationships are important, are we investing in those relationships? When I have my one-on-ones with people, am I making sure that we're talking about the non-work stuff too? And I believe we should do that first, as an example. And if I'll just use that as an example, are we simply transacting business with our team, or are we having deeper interactions with our team? And if we want our teams to be interacting, we better make sure we are as well.
Mhm. I think so. I love that word intentional that you use there, Kevin, as to the way to make that distinction between what we need to do when we're in the office versus out of the office. So my team is based in the Philippines, in Manila. The people that work with me full time, we have a beautiful contract team that are all around the world, and many members, 4 members of my team, I haven't even met. And we've worked together for 18 months. Super excited. I'm going to be in Manila this time next week. We're all going to be hanging out, which will be amazing. But I think people at the beginning of the pandemic made the assumption that you couldn't have a high level of connection if you weren't in person and you weren't, at the water cooler and bumping each other over lunch. But I think it's proved to us that we can. And if you're intentional, you can build those moments. And it's having the awareness and the commitment to do that that's important.
I have written 3 books with Wayne Trammell, and one of them finishing at the start of the pandemic, one fully during the pandemic, and I can count on one hand the number of hours we were physically together in any of the writing or planning for any of and all of the 3 books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, that's just one example, right?
Yeah.
My team is also largely remote. I have 2 members that joined us during the pandemic, and one member of my team has not yet met the 2 of them, because when we finally were all back together last year, she wasn't able to be with us. So, I mean, 100%. Now, is there value in being together? Of course there is. And should we, and can that help bring energy and engagement? Yes. But everyone who's saying we got to get them back together in order to have engagement, either already had a problem when they left, or don't really understand what engagement is.
So we clarified that engagement is around people choosing whether we're engaged or not. Is there anything else you could say, Kevin, that just really clarifies for people what we really mean by engagement? I want to make sure I'm super clear as we go through this.
Well, I'll say one more thing. So we were talking about my niece getting married. So before they got married, they got engaged. There was nothing that Kevin could do to make her be engaged. She had to choose, right? And it wasn't from facts and logic. There's an emotional component to it. So we probably shouldn't leave this conversation about engagement without realizing that it's not just a choice, although the choice part is incredibly important, but there's an emotional component to engagement as well. And that's all the more reason why we can't say, I need you to be more engaged. Right? Yeah. It's there, that emotional component is important to what engagement means. And when we said it earlier, we said, it's not like you are or aren't, it's degrees of, and the degrees of have a lot to do with how you feel about the work, how you feel about your commitment, how you feel about your contribution, how you feel about those you work with, how much you care. Right? And when we care more, everything changes.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's think about this relationship between engaged and energized. How does that work for you?
Well, again, I think they're just absolutely linked, right? So now, can people be energized for a time without being engaged? I think you could be. Like, I could get excited about a thing for a little bit of time, but even in that moment, I'm probably more engaged in my work, right? So, but we can be energized by a specific project, by a specific event. We could get excited about Emma's coming to the Philippines, and that might not have anything really to do with the work. So I think that there's the chance for us to have some level of heightened energy or more positivity for a time that wouldn't necessarily be 100% connected to engagement. But I think that if you think about them over any length of time, I don't think you can have one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can
I
think
mean,
about that either direction, right? You say,
yeah.
well, if I'm engaged, if I'm really engaged, I'm probably going to be more energized. I'm going to probably be a little easier for me to get up in the morning to go to work. I'll be a little more excited about Monday morning than I was before. And if I'm really energized, I probably can't help myself. I'm getting a little more engaged in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm loving that we've kind of explored this whole concept of choice. We've talked about alignment to goals, alignment to values. We've talked about this essence of leading by example, and also the kind of far too easy thing that we let ourselves off the hook because we're hybrid or we're not in the office with that lead by example. What have we missed so far, Kevin? What have I not asked a question about that you're thinking, oh, I wish Emma had asked a question about that?
I think you've done great. I don't know that there's any major piece that we haven't talked about. Damon says he had a light bulb moment. I've been telling my colleagues they have to be more engaged with no evident change. Now I understand why, and I have to change my approach. So there you go.
Damon, so thrilled that you're here with us today. I feel as if we're all sharing together in this, Damon, and yeah, awesome and you know what comes up for me as we look at this, Kevin? That direct link between the energized and engaged. It's so obvious. And when we fall into that busy activity, if we're not checking in, are we engaged, it can have the knock on our energy.
Oh, 100%.
It's
right?
kind of
Because
win.
100%. And, and sometimes all of that busy, right? The fallacy of busy, if you will, the tyranny of busy, if you will, leads us not to energy, but to burnout, right?
Yeah.
And which is kind of the opposite of that. And so let's think about it that way. Like if people are burnt out, how engaged are they? Like someone could have been really engaged in their work, but if they're at that place of really on the edge, really have it being sort of frayed, really being burnt out, they're not engaged then, at least not in that moment, not in the way that they were. It doesn't mean they can't be recaptured, right? But not in that moment. They're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm going to certainly step forward more into my leading by example. I'll be checking in with the team when I'm there, we're with them next week, and encouraging everyone to come up with their own strategies. I'm so delighted that we've had a chance to have this conversation today.
Well, I have been looking forward to it, and I was so glad that you were willing to do it and that we could find a time to do it. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you that have joined, and those of you that have commented and those of you that didn't. And obviously there'll be some who are watching this later. And Emma, I want to thank you. I hope that those of you that are watching now or later found this useful, because that's why we did it. And I will say this, that if I think I put on LinkedIn the other day, Emma, if you don't know Emma Weber, that's reason enough to be on this live. And hopefully now people get that. So I would encourage, if you've been here and you didn't know Emma until now, go connect with her on LinkedIn and follow her great work. And if you're not connected with me, I hope you'll do that as well. But Emma, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you, Kevin.
And I hope you have a great day. I've had a great day. And in our, 12 hours ish of differences in time, you enjoy yours, and I'm going to wrap up mine. So thanks everybody for being here. We'll be back with another one of these tomorrow. Let's see, at noon Eastern time tomorrow. I'll be doing this with Susan Fowler. Do you know Susan, Emma?
I do know Susan.
Yeah. It's going to
Susan,
be awesome. I hope that you all will come back and join us then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.